Hi class, this is Sir Alex Vasco and welcome to our lesson in General Biology 2. Today we are going to talk about lesson 8, which is all about the animal nutrition and the digestive system. Today we are going to focus mainly about the digestive system and the parts of digestive system. And later on we will going to focus on animal nutrition. So let's start the first part. Understanding overview. First, understand that all organisms must have a source of energy or source of nutrients. We know that plants obtain the molecules for them to survive from the air and the minerals from the ground. And we know that via photosynthesis, they can create the important compounds that they need in order for them to survive, such as ATPs. However, most animals like us, humans, actually have to obtain nutrients via the consumption of other organisms. We cannot survive via just drinking water from the ground or just by breathing air. We have to have a source of energy, and for us humans, we tend to get our energy via consumption of other animal species as well as some fruits and vegetables. So we can differentiate various organisms on how they can actually produce or what type of organisms they have to consume in order for them to be able to get the nutrients they need in order for them to survive. There are some that what we call the herbivores. Herbivores are basically animals whose primary source of food are plant-based. So animals that eat mostly or eat plants most of the time. They do not eat meat, unlike us. And then we have different examples of herbivores, such as frugivores, which is the animals who only eat fruits. We have granivores, who mostly eat seeds. And then we have nectivores, who takes their nutrients from the nectars. And then we have folivores, who basically eat mostly leaves. So these are some examples of herbivores. And then we have carnivores. So carnivores, basically these are animals that eat other animals. They eat precisely mostly meat. There are different kinds of carnivores, such as obligate carnivores, which is from the name itself, obligate, meaning they only eat animals. They do not eat anything else. Example of these are cats, and or in the feline family, such as lions. You cannot force a cat or a lion to eat vegetables because they are obligate carnivores. So if you see someone that is feeding their cats vegan food, that is quite very dangerous for your cat, actually, because they are obligate carnivores. And then we have what we call the facultative carnivores, wherein they can have an option whether they want to eat animals. And facultative carnivores are most of the time are also called omnivores, because omnivores can have an option whether to eat animals or plant-based food. So humans are prime examples of omnivores. We can eat animal products such as meat, eggs, milk, and then we can also have plant-based diets such as lettuce, tomatoes, and other plant-based products. So these are the different types of animals based on their primary source of food. And then we can also differentiate the animals, whether of course they're invertebrate or vertebrate. And depending on whether you're invertebrate or a vertebrate, invertebrate meaning animals that do not have a backbone. Vertebrates, on the other hand, are animals with backbones. Animals that are invertebrates, such as worms, jellyfishes, can have very different digestive systems compared to, for example, animals that are vertebrate. If you are an invertebrate, for most of the time you usually have a very simple gastrovascular system. When we talk about gastrovascular system, we're just basically meaning the digestive system. Gastro meaning your stomach, and then the vascular system. For most of the time, for example, for invertebrates such as Jellyfishes, they only have one opening, that is both their mouth and their anus. So the food that they consume comes in on one end, and then the digestive system releases enzymes in order to break down their food, and then they release the waste product via the same end. There's also a much more complex types of digestive system for invertebrates called the alimentary canal. Alimentary canal this time has two endings, wherein you have your mouth and then you have the digestive tract and all the important digestive system in order for you to digest your food, and then you have a separate area in order for you to release the or to release the waste products, which most of the time is called the anus. So this alimentary canal, you can actually see these in animals such as worms, which are invertebrate. And then for vertebrate, we can have four different types of digestive system. Whether you are monogastric, humans are example of monogastric from the word itself, mono meaning one, gastric meaning you have one digestive chamber, or you have one stomach. And then we have avians. Avians are actually the digestive system for, or avians actually mean bird. These are mostly like chickens, birds, any other type of avians. They have different type of digestive system because they actually do not masticate. Masticate is another term for chewing their food. Birds do not chew their food, so they have to have a different set of digestive system in order to help them digest their food. And then we have another type of digestive system for our vertebrates, which is called the ruminants. Ruminants, mostly these are cows, goats, sheep, are vertebrates that have actually about four stomachs. And there's actually a reason for that. The main reason is that most of the food that they consume is cellulose. Cellulose are starches that comes from plants, and these cellulose are actually very difficult to digest. So eating tons of grasses and eating tons of cellulose, you need to have the aid of various microorganisms that will help you digest those food products. And ruminants usually contains about a four stomach that contains various numbers and various microorganisms in those stomach to help digest their food. And then you also have pseudo ruminants, which usually have about three stomachs. So let's differentiate this more. Monogastric, meaning one stomach chamber. For most of the monogastric animals, such as humans, we have teeth. Teeth are very important because it helps us masticate. Masticate means to chew, and masticating foods usually leads us to having the bolus, which helps. Bolus is basically the chewed food in your mouth, and chewing your food actually starts to help breaking down those proteins. It starts to break down those materials that you need in order for you to digest and absorb the nutrients in your food. And the stomach of a monogastric animal, usually again human more specifically, has a gastric juices of about 1.5 to 2.5 pH, so they're very acidic. Specifically for humans, we actually have hydrochloric acid as our gastric juice, or our stomach acid. For avian, like I've mentioned, they do not masticate their food because they do not have teeth, and they have a variety of food that they eat. They eat seeds, they eat insects, they eat grains and other types of other materials that may be proven to be difficult to digest if they are monogastric, because again, for monogastric we can have one stomach chamber because we already starts digesting the food as soon as we start chewing on it. But for birds, they do not have feet, so most of the time they just swallow everything. So they have an area in their stomach called the pouch, wherein there is stored their food, and then from the pouch it enters the proventriculus. Proventriculus is where the gastric juices are produced in the stomach of an avian, and the food is starting to digest. And they actually have two stomachs. The first is the proventriculus, wherein this is where the Stomach acid starts to digest the food, and then it enters what we call the gizzard. Gizzard is the second part of the stomach of the birth, and this is the area for grinding because some birds actually eat stones, and those stones are actually grinded in this area in the gizzard. One thing about avian as well is, unlike us, that has for monogastric, that has a difference between the wet waste product and the solid matter, like feces, no, yung tain natin at yung ihi natin, we have separate exit for that. But for avian, for birds, a lot of them do not have uh, a separate section kung saan sila iihi and kung saan sila tatae. And that is because of this, it is also affected via their digestive system, because that's actually part of the digestive system. So most of the time, or not most of the time, all of the time, the avians actually has mixed feces and liquid waste product, and there's actually a term for that. Let me think if I can remember later. And then we have the ruminants. Ruminants are mostly herbivores, and whose diets include a lot of fibers and a lot of roughage because of the amount of grass and because the amount of leaves and other plant-based products that they eat. If you actually notice a ruminant like a cow, you would see that they chew only on their bottom, what they call this, their jaw. They move their bottom jaw but not their upper mouth, because their upper, they do not actually have an upper incisor teeth. An incisor teeth is the one that helps you break down all the food, so most of their teeth are on the bottom, and that's what they use to grind up their food. But what's interesting about ruminants is they have four stomachs called the rumen and the reticulum. So what happens is that in the rumen and reticulum, there's actually various microorganisms such as prokaryotes and protists that helps digest those cellulose fibers. Those cellulose, again, is a starch that you will find in a lot of plants, and that makes the plants very, very difficult to digest. So you need to have these microorganisms. What happened if you actually watch a cow eat plants is that they actually just keep eating and they keep swallowing. They are not chewing. What happens is they're actually placing all of those swallowed food, those swallowed grass, into the rumen and the reticulum, wherein the prokaryotes and the protists starts to digest the cellulose. And what happens next is the cow or the ruminants will actually vomit, regurgitate the bolus or that digested materials from their reticulum, which is their second stomach, back to their mouth. And that's when you see them chew. So when you actually see the cows chew, they do not usually start getting materials from the ground, because they already took the ones that they need, stored in the rumen and the reticulum, wait for it to start to digest, and then place it back into their mouth, wherein they start to chew it again. So that term is actually chewing the cud. Cud is the term for the chewed up material or the digested material from the reticulum. So they're chewing the cud, and after chewing that, they actually swallow it again, but this time, instead of placing it in the rumen and in the reticulum, they actually place it on the third stomach called the omasum, wherein the water gets removed, and from there it will go to the obomasum or abomasum, which the digestive enzymes are found there, and it will fully starts to digest all the materials that they have just chewed. So that is how cows actually digest their food. And then we also have others called the pseudoruminants. Pseudoruminants usually have three stomach chambers, and they have a cecum, wherein it contains where you will find the microorganisms to digesting cellulose. Wherein for ruminants, you will find them in the rumen and the reticulum, but for pseudoruminants, you will find them in the cecum, because they actually do not have rumen. They have the reticulum, omasum, and the obasum, but they do not have the rumen and that's why they have three chambers, and they also have another part called the cecum, wherein you will see the a lot of microorganisms there that will help them digest cellulose. So that is the digestive system of various vertebrates. Now let's talk about the different parts of the digestive system, starting with the oral cavity. Oral cavity, oral just means mouth, so this is your mouth cavity. This is the food point entry, meaning this is where the food goes in, and this is where a lot of the mastication process starts to happen. Mastication is a very important process because this is the start of breaking down the food. This is mostly the mechanical breaking down. Not a lot of chemical reaction is happening here, so we're just breaking down the cell wall. We're breaking down the structure of the cell and turning it into what we call a bolus. And that bolus, I will explain later what it is. That it's created by basically mixing the saliva from the food that you've eaten. And we have three salivary glands in our oral cavity. The parotid gland, wherein you will find it just in front of your ears. You have your submandibular, mandible means your jaw, so sub is under, so you will find the salivary gland underneath your mandible or around the area on your jaw. And then you have your sublingual. Lingual means tongue, so this gland is found underneath your tongue. And all of these are important glands because it secretes saliva. And saliva is important in chewing, not only because it helps us create the bolus and softens the material in our mouth, creating a bowl of food, chewed up food, but also because it contains an amylase. Amylase is a digestive enzyme found in the saliva that actually starts to break down starches into a disaccharide called maltose. So your saliva is actually already part of your digestive system because it starts to breaking down starches. Starches are not polysaccharides, and they're very big structure, and your saliva is breaking them down into a smaller structure called maltose. You will also find another type of enzyme called the lipase, which is released from the tongue, and lipase is important in breaking down triglycerides. Triglycerides, if you remember our discussion, triglycerides are fats. These are lipids. So starches and lipids are actually starts to break down just by chewing your food via the enzyme amylase and lipase. And then bolus is basically the chewed up food, basically the bowl of food that you swallow. And there are two passageways in your oral cavity, beginning with the trachea. Trachea is an opening that opens up towards your lungs, and it has an opening called the glottis. This glottis is blocked by the epiglottis when you are swallowing food. Otherwise, if you swallow your food and the glottis is not blocked properly, that's when you start to forgot what's the Tagalog term for that, but you start to choke. You can actually choke if there's a bigger object that is trapped in your trachea. It means there's no air going inside into your lungs. You start to choke. So the trachea, they basically have the same path. It's only being blocked so that no food is going to enter there. And then the second passageway is the esophagus. The esophagus is the tube that connects your oral cavity to your stomach. And in order to push down food, it contracts in wave-like motion called peristalsis. And this peristalsis is the one that pushes the bolus or the chewed food into your stomach. So if you look when you swallow, it looks something like this. So this is water. This is the trachea around this area, and that is the epiglottis right there. There you go. So this area is about the trachea, and this is the esophagus. This part right there is the epiglottis, and this right here is the glottis. This is the opening to the trachea. When you actually swallow, a lot of process happens. A lot of signaling is happening in this area, and what it does is it actually flap this. You can think of this as a door that closes the epiglottis in order for the food not to go into the trachea but go into the esophagus. So it looks something like this. So that is the epiglottis right there. This is the glottis. As you can see, it's basically the same hole being shared, right? That is the esophagus right there. So when you see, when your tongue pushes your food, it actually results in closing down your trachea by the epiglottis. You can see it closed, and then the food goes directly into the esophagus and not in the trachea. That is actually what is happening when you are swallowing your food. And this is the oral cavity part of your digestive system. Remember, we have amylase and lipase here that already starts to break down starches into disaccharide called maltose, and then lipase, which starts to break down the lipids or the triglycerides. Next, we have the esophagus. Esophagus is the tube that connects your mouth to your stomach, and it has wave-like series of muscle contraction and relaxation that pushes the food down to the stomach, and this is unidirectional. It only goes in one direction. The reason for that is, for you, when you swallowed food, you do not start to regurgitating it or vomiting it. This wave-like series of muscle contraction and relaxation, this is basically muscle contraction, is the peristalsis. So it looks something like this. When you swallow food, the area around here, it starts to contract. So it starts to contract here, and this area here, it starts to relax, contract, relax. And when that happens, it pushes the food, and as you can see, when the food goes there, it contracts and then it relaxes further down, contracts and relaxes, pushing the food down from your mouth into your stomach. That is how the esophagus moves. It's not just a tube that where your food starts, it just slides. No, the muscles on your esophagus is actually contracting and relaxing, pushing the food into your stomach. So that is what it looks like under a X-ray. And then there's also what we call as sphincters. Sphincter are ring-like muscles that are contracted to form a valve. This is basically what closes your stomach to your esophagus, because we have what we call the gastroesophageal sphincter. This gastroesophageal sphincter is the sphincter that prevents you from having an acid reflux. Acid reflux is basically when the digestive juices, the hydrochloric acid from your stomach, moves from the stomach up into your esophagus, and that's when you feel the heartburn. We also call it the heartburn. So this is the gastroesophageal sphincter. As you can see here, under normal conditions, it's closed so that the hydrochloric acid does not go into your esophagus. When you swallow, what happens? This sphincter actually relaxes and it opens, allowing the bolus to go inside, and then it closes again before the gastric acid starts to come up. So what happens when you have issues on your sphincter? You sometimes experience acid reflux, and a lot of people had issues like GERD, which is a very worse condition wherein the acid from the stomach starts to always go in your esophagus, and it could actually destroy your esophagus, resulting in you having harsh, very low voice and other complications. So our body is built in to prevent that. So from the esophagus, we now have the stomach. Stomach is where the digestion of the food actually happens, and it has again a pH level of about 1.5 to 2.5, and it expands during feeding, and it can actually expand up to 20 times its size. In reality, when you are not eating, the stomach is actually very small. And the size of the stomach, in theory, actually also affects the signaling on your body to tell you whether you are full or whether you are hungry. At a certain point wherein your stomach is at this threshold wherein it is very small, your body then signals, or that stomach then releases signals into your brain telling you that you are hungry. And when you eat something and the stomach starts to expand, that expansion again releases another type of signal that will tell your brain that you are full. So that is one of the theory on how we can tell if we are hungry or if we are full. It's the size of the stomach. And also there's more signaling. That's just one of them. So this is a site for protein digestion. So for the start, in the mouth, in the oral cavity, we have been digesting protein, right, from the amylase. Or no, that's for starches. We are only digesting starches from the amylase, and then we have our lipase, which digest what was it? Lipase digest triglyceride or fats. So for now, we haven't even digested the proteins, because proteins are actually digested in the stomach because we have another enzyme called the pepsin. Pepsin is the enzyme found in your stomach that digests your protein, and they are released by chief cells. When the chief cells releases the pepsin, they start as pepsinogen. Pepsinogen are basically enzymes that are not yet active. They're inactive and they have to be activated. There's two ways to activate them. One is when they are released by the chief cells, the pepsin that is already present in the stomach will activate the pepsinogen. Another way to activate the pepsinogen for them to become pepsin in order to digest protein is when they are exposed to the hydrochloric acid in your stomach. And then we have another types of cell that is very important in our stomach called the parietal cells. Parietal cells are the cells that releases the hydrogen and chlorine ions, and when you mix these two, that is how you can make the hydrochloric acid. So the parietal cells is basically the cells that releases the hydrochloric acid by releasing hydrogen ions and chlorine ions, which then combine in your stomach. When the digestive process is happening in your stomach, it is actually churning. When we talk about churning, it looks something like this. It's contracting. So when you are digesting food in your stomach, it is moving, it is not stationary. And the reason for this is because it's basically mixing the food swallowed, which is the bolus, into the stomach, into the acid. And this helps in the mechanical digestive process of your food. And when that food, that bolus, is finally digested, it turns into chyme. Chyme is basically the food that is digested by the stomach, so it from bolus it becomes chyme, and this chyme is what you would actually push into first your small intestine. The pyloric sphincter is the one that regulates. So we have two sphincter. We have the gastroesophageal sphincter here, which connects the esophagus to your stomach and pushes the bolus, or basically the entrance of the bolus, to your stomach. And then you have the pyloric sphincter, which then regulates the release of chyme into the stomach. And the pyloric sphincter is actually releasing chyme one small portion at a time. Unlike bolus, wherein it entered whole, the chyme is actually being released one small portion at a time. That's why when you have eaten, it usually takes about 2 hours before you have digested your food. So a lot of times you don't feel full because you still have there's still food digesting in your stomach. And you may notice that we have a very strong acid in our stomach. So you may ask, why is our stomach not being burned? Simply because our stomach is actually built in such a way to protect itself from the acid. by releasing mucus. The mucus aligns the wall of your stomach, which prevents the stomach cells from being burnt. And when this actually ruptures, it can cause a this is what causes the ulcers in your stomach. And there's various ways that your mucus can actually be ruptured. Uh, or you can have ulcers. One of them is actually stress. When you feel stress, you probably have experienced having stomach ache. And the reason for that is because you're actually weakening the mucus in your stomach. And when there's so much stress is happening in your life, you can actually start to have stomach ulcers. So you can see that stress is actually very detrimental, not only in our mental health, but even in our physical body. But also, there's other ways to destroy mucus, not only stress, but stress is just one of them. And when you have these stomach ulcers, these are wounds, unhealed wounds in your stomach, because you don't have the mucus to protect it from the acid and the bacteria. I forgot the term. I forget the term, but there's a bacteria that results in the formation of those ulcers. So that is the stomach part of your digestive system. Now let's move on into your digestive system called the small intestine. I forgot to remove this, but we'll go on this later. In the small intestine, this is where proteins, fats, and carbohydrates are finally fully digested. So at the beginning, the fats and the carbohydrates or the starches, which starts to digest on your tongue, on your oral cavity, and then the proteins, a majority of them starts to be digested in your stomach, and then by the end that they enter the intestine, this is where most of them are fully digested. Your small intestines called has projections called villi projections. You can think of this as extensions on your stomach, and these are very important because it actually increases the surface area of your small intestines, and you want to increase the area of your small intestine via these projections because we are very small, but the food that we have to digest are actually quite big, and there's a lot of absorption happening. So by increasing this surface area that the food can be touched, so that the small intestines can absorb all those minerals, then the body would do so. This villi also on top of them, on the basal part of their cells, has microvilli, so smaller projections on top of these projections. And again, this microvilli again increases the surface area of your small intestines. After when your small intestine starts to absorb the minerals or the nutrients from the food, it would first carry some of those nutrients on the hepatic portal vein. The hepatic portal vein then leads to the liver, and on the liver, this is where the distribution of the nutrients happens. And also, this is where the liver would notice if you have toxic substances in your food, such as alcohol, other bad microorganisms, drugs in your body, and the liver would then work hard to actually remove those toxic substances. So when you have heard quotes like you have a healthy liver because you don't drink, it's because you are not exerting a lot of work onto your liver by removing a lot of those toxic substances such as drugs and alcohol. So then so this is the nutrients. Then the chyme that enters, how does it enters the small intestine? First, the pyloric sphincter pushes the chyme from the stomach into first the duodenum, and then it moves to the jejunum, and then it ends on the ileum. These are the three parts of the small intestine. In the duodenum, this is basically the C shape of the intestine. That shape right there. There's a C shape right there. And this is where chyme is actually mixed with the pancreatic juices. And that is important because the pancreatic juices, or the enzymes from the pancreas, neutralizes the acidity that is present on your chyme. And you want that because you don't want acid on your small and big intestines. Also, the pancreatic juices has enzymes for digestive enzymes for starches, proteins, and fats. And then all of these digestion and absorption of the nutrients happens all of this here in the small intestines. So from the duodenum, it enters. There is bile. So bile is also mixed on the duodenum. Bile is another enzyme released by the liver to emulsify and digest lipids or fats. And this is produced by liver, but it is stored in your gallbladder. And then you have your pancreas that produces again to remove the acidity on your chyme and to produce enzymes for starches and proteins. From the all of this is happening in the duodenum, and then it moves to the jejunum, wherein the hydrolysis of your nutrients happens, and most of the chemical digestion, meaning all of this as well, this digestion of the fats, lipids, and the starches, as well as the absorption of the minerals for your body, all happens on the jejunum part. And in the last part, we're in the ileum, the bile and the vitamins are reabsorbed in your body. So after the small intestines, it enters the area of called the large intestines. In the large intestines, this is where water is being reabsorbed from the chyme. And large intestine, although from the name itself large, it is actually much shorter than the small intestine. Small intestines is actually about 60 meters. It's actually very long, and it's just folded in your body. But we call it large intestines because the diameter of the large intestines is much bigger compared to the small intestines. There's also three parts in the large intestines. You have the cecum, wherein it joins the ileum, or the last part of your small intestines, to the colon. Colon is the other name for large intestines. This is where the waste product is, waste matter is first stored. And then from cell colon, wherein it has four parts, this is home to various microorganisms. It has tons of important microbes and other microflora that helps you further digest and absorb minerals on your food, and it also reabsorbs water. There's four parts called the ascending colon, which is around here, so it goes up, and then you have transverse colon, and then you have the descending, and then you have your sigmoid. So ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid. These are the parts of these are the four parts of your colon. And lastly, the third part of your colon is the rectum and the anus. Rectum, this is the terminal end of the intestine wherein the feces are stored. So, bagay, yung waste product na, yung tinatain na natin, dito mo na siya mag-stored sa rectum. And then until when it is full and you're ready to go in the bathroom, etc., then all of this would go out of the anus. So that is the digestive system of the body. And lastly, we have the accessory organs, or the organs that is directly not connected on your digestive system but plays an important role, meaning your salivary glands, because it releases the amylase. Also, you have your liver, which secretes the bile, and important for fat digestion because it emulsifies the lipids. And then it's also important for detoxifying the if you have taken any drugs or alcohol, etc. And then you have your pancreas that neutralizes the acid on the duodenum, but also releases enzymes for the digestion of fat, proteins, and starches. And lastly, you have your gallbladder, which stores the bile, which the liver creates. So those are the four important accessory organs in your digestive system, and this is the digestive system. I hope everything is clear. If you guys have any question, do not hesitate to message me. Thank you so much, guys, and have a great day.